That segues us into this discussion. President Cyril Ramaphosa has transferred the administration powers and functions of embattled state-owned enterprises. They'll now report to their respective line department ministries. There are mixed reaction, though, to the decision to transfer SOEs to a national enterprise holding company at some point in the future. Let's now speak to Professor Peter Goss, corporate governance expert. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time. Good evening to you. I mean, let's start with your reaction to see these particular SOEs now being sent to their respective line function ministries.
We shouldn't forget that the SOEs have also lost a home with the Department of Public Enterprises being no longer part of the various government and national departments. So important to note that what's happened in this particular scenario is that, one, the president has transferred executive authority for the former Department of Public Enterprises to the minister in the presidency for planning, monitoring and evaluation. Remember also that this particular move of these enterprises is really locating them in line ministries where they fit better. For example, airways fits better in transport. So there is some logic to this, some rationale to this. I guess the bigger question is, what will this do for them in the short term with the imminent National State Enterprises Bill that has also been allocated shareholder responsibility to the minister in the presidency for planning, monitoring and evaluation?
And Prof, I wonder then, looking at this Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, and now these executive powers, being transferred to the minister there, does it make sense, particularly when it comes to governance and also effective oversight when it comes to some of these, SOEs that we've seen underperforming and also bleeding the public purse in the past?
Early days to make that judgment, because there's no real move in terms of the National State Enterprises Bill. The shareholder powers in the National State Enterprises Bill remain with the president. The president is going to be a super shareholder going forward. But the shareholder responsibilities for these recently transferred state-owned enterprises go to the line ministries. The shareholder responsibility goes to the line ministries. Later on, the super shareholder will certainly intervene. Not yet, because the National State Enterprises Bill is not nowhere near implementation yet. It's quite a logistical nightmare. I guess the real issue is in that new dispensation of the National State Enterprises Bill, in that new dispensation where the president is a super shareholder, therein lies a number of challenges, and that can best be overcome with making sure he establishes separation of powers as it relates to how he appoints boards, how boards account to him, and how we make sure that he doesn't become so super as to put us back in some of the difficult scenarios we had under state capture, where the presidency was too powerful in relation to state enterprises.
And I was going to ask about that because, I mean, when you take a step back, as you say, to the State Capture Commission, we then see a concentration, of power here, and you see then how detrimental that became in some of these particular entities. Now the Minister of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation needs to take into consideration quite a lot of what came out from that commission, as she now is tasked with ensuring that this National State Enterprise Bill comes into effect. Apart from the boards and the accounting and the concentration of power, what else does she need to take into account to ensure that this is as effective as they're planning for it to be?
A minor correction. This is not the Minister for Planning anymore. This is the Minister in the presidency responsible for planning, monitoring and evaluations. I understand the confusion it can cause. I think we've got to allow the new dispensation of the supranational, I could use the word super circumspectly, of the National State Enterprises Bill, in which the president will be the sole shareholder, sole shareholder in relation to national state-owned enterprises in the future, the mooted model. There's no clarity yet. I think that the minister in the presidency responsible for planning, monitoring and evaluation is also given the responsibility in the recent media release from the president 2 days ago to refine the processes for this. As in my governance insight tell me that those processes need to also cover sound regulations for, very importantly, the independence of boards of these state-owned enterprises that in some or other way will account to the super shareholder. How those boards are appointed, how they account, how independent, competent, knowledgeable and skilled members of those boards are appointed within the norms of good governance established in international best practices, such as the recently published G20 OECD 2023 Principles of Corporate Governance, such as the Corporate Governance Standard ISO 37000 published in September 2021. Because our own regime for corporate governance is getting more and more dated, we need to update our own regime for corporate governance. So I think therein lies the fine line, is how the new dispensation of the falling under the National State Enterprises Bill, once it's implemented, therein will be the proof of the pudding.
And I suppose it also deals with, some of the concerns that have been raised by others who are saying that, the issue of corruption is also one that needs to be addressed. It needs to be, dealt with when it comes to SOEs. And if then you have a clear role, clear fine lines, and where everybody begins and ends, it also addresses that particular issue.
I'm fearful of the centralization of power in governments around the world. The more centralized power is in governments, the more it tends to be abused, and scenarios like state capture around the world will prove that point. I think mature regimes, mature governments who are governing, they make sure that they put in place checks and balances. So fundamentally, a number of independent conflicts will emerge from the National State Enterprises Bill when it's being implemented, such as the principle of a sole shareholder for state enterprises. Mature shareholders know how much they should be hands off, how much they should entrust responsibilities for governance and corporate governance of these national state-owned enterprises and companies to an independent board led by an independent chairman, which independent chairman looks after the wider interests of the real shareholder, the general public in South Africa. So this title of shareholder can be misinterpreted by politicians. They sometimes think they're the boss and in charge of everything. I know one or two state-owned enterprises in which, for example, ministers instruct boards that you don't do anything without talking to me. That's purely irregular. That should not happen in good governance. Boards are independent of shareholders. They look after, first and foremost, the interests of the entity they serve and the wider interests of stakeholders in the case of a state-owned entity. And those stakeholders are the general public, South African society and citizens.
Prof, I know it's too soon to tell, I know, but in light of what you're saying, what's in store for us?
I'm terrified. I think that we must be positive. The Government of National Unity offers much encouragement for us going forward. Recent actions and the independence and mutual accountability of different political parties augurs well for our future. We have to trust the future. I think the Government of National Unity promises us a certain future. The National State Enterprises Act, or Bill rather, promises a positive future. And that positive future, we hope those who take charge going forward, particularly politicians, know that they should be hands off, eyes on, not hands on, eyes off.
Do you think
Boards
they can?
Are more hands on. CEOs are even more hands on running the business day to day. What we do need is more accountability. Giving more authority to oversight organizations such as the Auditor General, making for random governance reviews, such as board evaluation reviews, to also test the independence of the shareholder and the executive authority. Then we will be in business, and a publication of the results of those board reviews. That will take us forward.
And I hope, it doesn't fall on deaf ears, because you think about whether or not this makes sense, for example, to investors who are watching, who are saying that we want to see how this all unfolds. And then at the same time, as you say, do they understand that the independence of these boards is actually something that's going to be critical going forward? But Prof, let's see, as you say, it's early days. Let's see then what happens and watch these developments closely. Thank you so much for talking to us this evening. That was Professor Peter Goss, corporate governance expert.